Will they or won't they? The Titans have answered that question. A commanding trade deadline possibility and ruh-roh, Renfrow. We got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it's time for Inside Coverage. It's Inside Coverage. I'm Jason Fitz, hanging out with Charles Robinson, Jori, Epstein, senior NFL reporters for Yahoo Sports. And look, we've got a lot to get into. Obviously, trade deadline trades that have been made. There's a lot of really important stuff, but I figure I'll just throw us off the rails before we've even started with the really important question, guys, because Halloween is, it's less than a week away at this point, or it's a little over a week. Are we full candy bar people? Are we like limited candy bar people? Are we chocolate people? Are we Skittles people? Jori, what's the candy selection going to be like for Halloween? This is what America really needs to know.
The candy selection. Wow, there's so many options. I don't know, like in New York City in an apartment, how many trick-or-treaters I'm getting, but I'm like a big believer in dark chocolate over candy. We could have this debate. So I think chocolate is the way to go.
I don't think you're getting many visitors in a New York
apartment.
I
think I'm getting 0. So I think I'll just eat the chocolate myself, which I love dark chocolate. So that will be doable.
I mean, I spent a lot of my childhood in Manhattan, with music stuff. And you're right. I never really thought about it. Like, you ain't going trick-or-treating around all the different apartments. Like, C-Rob, what do we do? Like, I mean, you've got a reputation. You are famous. People know you. Like, they're going to come up to that. Come on now. Like, what are we doing with the candy?
Well, I have executive control since Dawn is away on a nursing contract right now. I have complete control of what I want to dole out. So we were full candy bar people last year for the first time.
Wow.
And it was very well received. I don't do the door thing though. I like to put it all in a giant bowl, stick it outside, and I don't do the take one note either because I want to watch and see what happens. The best part of this is hearing the kids come up to the bowl and then go, there's a lot of commentary when they look in and they see full candy bars. And then watch what they do, because inevitably there will be a kid that tries to empty half the bowl into his bag, and you'll hear a parent start yelling, like, "No, you can't take all that. What are you doing?" I like the show, so I don't do the door. I do the honesty. It's not even an honesty test. It's just more of sort of a social experiment to see who's doing what when they get to the bowl.
I'm a longtime full candy bar giver, but that's also because I did it once and then I felt like suddenly I'd set an expectation. And the last thing I could do was walk off of that expectation. So now I feel like I'm being peer pressured by a 9-year-old that had nothing to do with my candy.
Well, you're that house.
But all of a sudden, you're
the house
that
now.
House.
People, you knew. Come on, when you were a kid, you telling me you didn't know, or you didn't hear? It was the breaking news of childhood when you'd be walking on the sidewalk and you hear somebody be like, "They have full candy bars at that house," and you'd be like, "Oh." Then
there's always like the one dentist on the street who had apples, and it's like, come on now. Wait, okay, my other question is, when you guys would get back from trick-or-treating, what would you do? Because I'm one of 4, and my siblings and I would always just we'd get it all on the floor, we'd organize our own, and then we'd start trading.
Okay, I have an older brother, and we don't have a particularly good relationship as adults, probably because we didn't as kids. So I would come home, and then I would have to submit my candy to him, and he would decide what he was taking and what I was going to try and take out of it. And there was it was straight mafia. Like there was no negotiation happening. It was, I will take these things, you may have the remainder, and there was no stopping it.
Listen, Fitz, every time Fitz goes to the lunchroom, just so you know, we still take all his stuff. So
the lunchroom in the office that none of us are in.
I just open the fridge and see somebody else is eating my stuff, and I'm like, sort of par for the course. Okay, let's get to football now. We got a lot to get into, not the least of which, trade deadlines around the corner. We'll get to some of the rumors and some of the speculation, some of the actual logic going into it. But let's start with a name that I'm not surprised to see moved, but a name that I think has meaning to be moved. Kevin Byard gets traded. The safety from the Titans moves to the Eagles. And, I'll admit my Nashville bias here, having lived there for a very long time and having covered the beginning of his career. When Kevin Byard is good, Kevin Byard is great, right? So you got in this situation a player that goes from a team that nobody pays attention to, that I honestly think C-Rob is a difference-making caliber player. I've watched enough of him over my career. I think the Eagles get a steal out of this.
Big time leader. I mean, big time leader of a defensive unit, backbone type of guy. It's interesting to me because you knew if there was a slow start, this was coming. Okay. It was because you have you looked at the Titans and you're like, if the line comes together and all these things happen and the offensive coordinator change takes hold, then Ryan Tannehill can stay healthy. They'll keep this team together for one more shot at it. Instead, it was the opposite. Offensive line fell apart. Ryan Tannehill got hurt. Now you're staring at a couple young quarterbacks going like, should we probably get a measure of these guys now since it's a great quarterback draft coming up? We don't anticipate taking another quarterback if we just traded up to draft Will Levis in the second. But let's make sure we get a look at everybody. And then you have Philadelphia and Howie Roseman, who's always out there looking, had a massive need at safety. And Byard made a ton of sense as Howie, basically when Howie dove into the research on this, there are a couple of things he looked at. It's, does this guy have the leadership qualities to come in right away and contribute to our locker room? He's not going to come in and be a wallflower. He'll be a leader for us. That's what we need down the stretch. It's the injection you want to get. Does the film still look good? When factors are right around him, you can be affected by poor play around you. I think he liked that. And I think number 3, he knew that Byard had redone his deal and some money was taken off the table for Kevin Byard this past offseason. So he knew like the end is there for Kevin Byard. He's likely not returning. They'll be willing to deal this guy. And he watched the season unfold in Tennessee the way that it did. He knew for weeks that this was potentially a guy that he could go and get. I thought it was interesting that he went and got him when he did, I don't want to say early, but early-ish. Like he jumped on him quite a bit before the trade deadline. I talked to another general manager about this and he said, look, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, this is smart by Howie because he didn't give Tennessee the opportunity to reel off one more win before the deadline and then go, wait, now we're 3-4. And wow, either Levis or Willis came out there and with the added practice had a great game. Maybe we can still turn this around. No, Howie's like, I'm getting my guy. I'm not letting anybody else jump in front of me. I think it's a really good addition for Philly. It made some sense for Tennessee. And actually, I thought it was like, 2 late round draft picks and a player. I thought that they got, you'll have to refresh my memory on the player that they sent, but they got more than I thought they would out of him. Yeah, that's right. Terrell Edmonds. Yeah. So to me, good return for Tennessee, given the fact that most people knew they're going to be a little bit of sellers. And this is one guy who makes obvious sense.
I just love this idea that we're getting another Titans-Eagles trade after how the last one went for each side. A.J. Brown trade basically lost a general manager his job. And hey, let's do it again. But no, I do think that I agree that there's the timing element in the sense of not giving them time to win another game and get false hope. But I also think there's the element of if you want the deal and the price point that you want, like offering it early and guaranteeing them that now when they might not know whether they're going to get someone at the trade deadline, like you have to either give them some leverage from a timing standpoint or a cost standpoint. And Howie's like, I'd rather do it from a timing standpoint, which I think is really smart. Another thing that's great to know about Byard is that he doesn't miss games. And like, I'm knocking on like 7 types of wood as I say this, but like, I think that at some point it's like he's played every game since every game. You just like, you look at it, it's reliable. Like 16, 17, whatever, 6. And so I think that that's something that a guy who's shown the durability, who's shown it during the season, can show it in the postseason. Like that's the type of guy you want to bring in your building as well.
Yeah. And I love your leadership point, C-Rob. It's pretty well covered and known from Titans people that, Byard's the type that will sit in that locker for 30 or 45 minutes and just answer every question that's tough to answer. And like, there are certain guys that have it. I think he has a lot of it. I love, Jori, that you mentioned the A.J. Brown trade because I can't help but watch that every time and think, man, not only did it cost a GM his job, I think it changed the course of the franchise. Like there are certain moves, knowing what wide receivers get paid now. And you think about the fact that everybody talks about a ceiling on this. I've always looked at it like, what were you willing to spend versus what you would have had to spend? So $3 or $4 million total was the reason that you let somebody go that now has changed the entire dynamic for both organizations. That you got that back. Like, but if you're the Titans, I mean, Jori, at this point, are you in sellers mode? Like, are you just looking to chunk everything out? Because obviously the speculation around Derrick Henry is not going anywhere. DeAndre Hopkins, like these are names that people know. But I mean, if you're the Titans, does it make sense to just start throwing everything out?
I mean, it's interesting. I think when we were talking about this before the show, this idea of like, okay, you've got Levis coming in, you've got Willis coming in. I think that understanding what you have, it can be very helpful in determining what you do next. But also, you might, even if you want to get rid of these guys, like how much value do they have and what are you actually getting back for them? And I think that that's the bigger question, is that like Derrick Henry might not have the value that you want to get for him.
No, not for the trade-off. Like I don't think either Henry or I thought for a moment there was a possibility Hopkins might get moved because the wide receiver market is definitely the market that there's a lot of teams paying attention to the wide receiver market right now. And it feels like there's a lot of need in terms of that being a position that multiple contenders or teams that have playoff aspirations feel like they could add another wide receiver to that room. Not so much so for the running back spot. I think the running back spot is still slow. When you talk to people in the Titans organization, there sure doesn't seem to be this big appetite to move them. I think they listen. They're in listeners mode on almost everybody, but some of the young guys. With both Hopkins and Henry, I think they know realistically they're not getting great value out of those players, particularly relative to they have young quarterbacks that they're going to have to get a look at down the stretch. And I don't know that you want to take away what Henry could do to help or what Hopkins could do to help for either of those young players down the stretch. Do you really want a late round pick and then go, yeah, we're going to take an asset off the table that really is going to help your growth and your confidence down the stretch for Malik Willis? Or obviously it looks like Will Levis is that guy, but they waited a year late. I will say that.
But to your point of what they're dealing with right now, Rob, like I think there has to be some acknowledgement. Look, court of public opinion may not matter to everybody, but Titans fans are, when I say Derrick Henry is beloved, like how are you selling hope? If you're in that organization, you're thinking, well, we could get a 6th round draft pick for him. Yeah. Okay. How are you packaging that to the city of Nashville? Because like that would not work.
And Tajay Spears too. That's another thing. They're not sitting there looking at him and going, yeah, let's go ahead and throw a whole workload on him, right away. Obviously his knee was a big deal coming into the draft. There are a lot of teams who had him off the draft board completely because they're like, that knee is not going to last more than maybe 3 years. And so now you're going to remove Henry, and in effect, you're hurting younger players you're trying to develop. You don't want to have to load everything onto Spears. Seeing Hassan Haskins is basically out of the fold there, back on IR, off the commissioner's exempt list, but that's a total mess. There's too many factors, I think, that come into it. And like you said, ownership also does not want to look at the fan base and go, yeah, you know what? We're just going to give you every reason not to show up. Like, we're not even going to give you Derrick Henry. We would rather have a late round draft pick. It's not as enticing as you would think.
Especially, Jori, when you referenced it earlier, but let's talk about it. Like, there are reports out there now that Ryan Tannehill is going to be, we know Tannehill's injured. I should say that Will Levis is going to get the start. There's an opportunity to sell hope right now to a fan base, right? Like, Titans fans are sitting there saying, "Wait, trade it up for the 2nd round. Will Levis going to be our starting quarterback." This could turn in, even though the season could go off the rails. It's a very hopeful moment for the team as they announce to the world. It seems that Will Levis is going to be the starting quarterback. Might do a split with Malik Willis, but there's positive there for the Titans.
Right. If you didn't believe in him at all, or if someone in the building, even if not everyone, didn't believe in him, then you wouldn't have taken Will Levis. And I think that a lot of times in situations like this with the quarterback, this is when the hope is at its highest before he starts playing. I'm not saying he won't start to create some hope while he's playing, but it'll be something different. He does still have a Hopkins. He does still have a Henry. Like, there are pieces for him to work with. I mean, the offensive line would be helpful as well. But I think that, like you said, this is a time where also, are you going to throw him in while selling off all the pieces around him? Then what kind of evaluation are you getting on him anyway?
So, C-Rob, are you surprised, though? Because, I mean, I guess I just didn't think that the world would know days before the game that Will Levis is going to be the starting quarterback.
It's a little interesting because you get a report that comes out and says Will Levis is the guy, the starter. And then Mike Vrabel's like, I didn't say that. And, indicates they're going to alternate between 2 players. Makes you wonder if everybody inside the building's on the same page in a situation like that, because you never want a report to come out and then your head coach to feel like he's obligated to beat it back a little bit. That just tells you that however the information came out of the organization, it certainly didn't come out where you had people who were running parallel tracks in terms of how they wanted that to happen. So I have to believe that Will Levis will be the starter. I have to believe that Malik Willis will be a player who gets mixed in during the course of the game. But it's always a situation with the coaching staff where if there's a question about which one of these players starts, or if, hey, maybe even Ryan Tannehill might be in there, you try to wait until Thursday, Friday, you get cute and do the best you can to make sure you're keeping your opponent guessing, which is basically what Vrabel did. He went back out there and said, you better be preparing for both these guys. They don't have the same styles.
Right.
We're going to keep everything
significant.
Yeah, we're going to keep everything on your plate in terms of of preparation. But I'm with you, Fitz. It's interesting when you see information come out on a morning and then a coach go to a podium and kind of go, yeah, that's not me. So you're like, all right, well then who was that? And why did it come out the way that it did?
Well, and Jori, to that point, and as you just said, they're very like Malik Willis, Will Levis, very different quarterback. So I could see why an organization will want to keep this tight. Like the way you're practicing for one is not the same as the other.
Right. And I think that that's when it matters the most, is when the game planning is significantly different. And you also have Will Levis, where there's like that element of mystery of what's he going to look like at the pro level. Do they want him to do what he did in college? Do they want him to do things a little bit differently? So you don't want it getting out this early. You can have a guy taking first team reps. Realistically, you should probably have both of them taking some reps and maybe some of that together. But no, I remember times often in Dallas when Mike McCarthy would not want to tell us that Tyron Smith was or wasn't going to be available at left tackle. And then Jerry Jones would go on radio on Tuesday and be like, yep, Tyron's out this week. And so I think you have sort of a situation here where it's like, you don't want that information getting out. It's a competitive advantage situation.
Fitz, I'll say this too, though. And Jori, I mean, like if you're going to start Levis, if you're sitting there and going, well, let's pick a place in the schedule to start. If you look at the pass rush win rate of defensive fronts, they don't have a player on the edge who puts them in the top 20 of pass rush win rate this season. And even the interior defensive lineman, I think Grady Jarrett's at like 15th in the league. Pretty enticing when you're sitting there staring at a front and going, yeah, they're not great, in terms of win rate and pass rush and pressure. Not the worst spot necessarily to give Will Levis a shot.
I want to give you flowers for enunciating pass rush win rate, which is always very difficult for me. Like PRWR, I think we need to come up with an acronym for it or something. PRWR is my vote. I will say before we move on, my last thought on this Levis thing is that there are some draft pundits going in last year that thought that in this year's upcoming draft, Will Levis would have been the 5th or 6th best ranked quarterback coming into this year's draft. So with that knowledge, I think it is actually important. Once you know the season is not going where you want it, I don't care what they paid last year. Last year's mistake is not this year's mistake. If you're Rand Carthon, you got to look around and be like, look, he's in the building. We had a year with him. But this year's upcoming draft class, by most analysis, is special. And so you better find out right now who you got, because if you got a shot at Drake May, you're taking him.
You got 2 wins. You still got a shot at having the first pick. You're not out of it yet. I mean, I know it's very unlikely to see Carolina get more than 2 wins this year, but still have a chance. Drake, people forget. No, they're not really forgetting, but there's going to be a raging debate. We talk about. I mean, we don't have to talk about it now, but put a pin in this. There's going to be this massive debate heading into the draft about Caleb Williams versus Drake May. There's going to be these 2 completely split camps that tell you Caleb's this arrogant guy and he has tools, but geez, he's on all these commercials and there's this and that. And how is he as a leader? And then here's Drake May, who doesn't have all the things that Caleb necessarily does. And it'll be a fun debate, and it'll make whoever ends up drafting Drake May with that second quarterback spot feel very good.
Yeah, and just a reminder, go look at tankathon.com right now, and you can find the draft order. Basically, every team picking in the top 6 is in desperate need of a quarterback. So nobody's trading up for it. The only way you're getting one of those top 2 picks is if you suck enough to get one of those top 2 picks. So speaking of trades, let's get into some trade deadline conversation here, because obviously we all know it's coming. But here's what's interesting to me, C-Rob. Like, bad teams won last week. I watched one of them destroy my beloved Raiders. I'm still hurt by it. But bad teams, 1 and 2 loss teams, seem to have an awakening last week. So how does that impact the trade deadline coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I actually talked to a GM about this, and he pointed it out. I hadn't even really thought about it. And he's like 4 one-loss teams all won last week. He's like, it's not good. And again, this is paraphrasing here, but he's like, you can have conversations going and you're feeling pretty good about it as the trade deadline comes up. And then all of a sudden, one of the teams that you feel good about them being at some layer of possibility where you're like, yeah, if I reach out to them, I think I can get this done. Then they win a game. And as he said, it becomes a conversation in the building about like, wait a minute, like, is this starting to turn for us now? And maybe ownership is sitting there and going, hey, I don't want to seem like I'm waiting being a white flag on the season. And, so that can change things. I think if you look at those 1-win teams, what are we talking about here? We're talking about Denver. We talked about Denver being a seller, right? It'd definitely be a trade deadline seller. Talk about Chicago. That's a team that feels like it's in the midst of a teardown mode, even though Matt Eberflus It seems like he might be coaching for his job right now. Talk about the Patriots that beat Buffalo of all teams. That is immediately shifts the conversation in that market to, is this the Bill Belichick turnaround? Like, is this that game now where it shifts them back into an 8-9 season and geez, Bill hangs on. And then the fourth team, the Giants, which there was a conversation about, like, are they going to offload Saquon Barkley? Could they be, sellers on a player here or there? All four of those teams win. Maybe you feel a little bit different. And then the big team, and that win actually came after I talked to this general manager, was Minnesota beats San Francisco. And you're sitting there now going, man, they're 3-4, looked pretty good in prime time. And
without Justin Jefferson.
Without Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison had an all-world game. And now you're going, maybe instead of, selling Danielle Hunter, which everyone thought this is the edge guy that with Brian Burns is going to be the hottest possible commodity. Now maybe you're sitting there going, maybe we just don't sell off Danielle unless really we get the package we want. At the very least, it gave leverage to the Vikings to say, we got a soft schedule coming up. Maybe we need to keep this guy on board and we can still try to figure out something in terms of a long-term extension.
Right. I think a defense with Danielle Hunter looked better against San Francisco than anyone else had this year. Like, yes, Jim Schwartz and the Cleveland Browns looked good, but that was not as decisive a win as the one this one. And I also get that Deebo Samuel wasn't there this week, but still, it's like that defense had it. And I think what's interesting, too, is that to me, it's less about, does that win drastically increase or decrease their chance at making the postseason? And more about, do you have this momentum that you're able to carry through, whether it's for this year, next year, or just the head coach, the general manager, all of that in the regime? Like, what are you doing to the momentum? Because I think that at the league level and at the club level, perception continues to matter. And so you have to be able to go back in front of these players and tell them, here's what our plan is. If you're willing to sell their teammates off.
There's a part of me that feels confused this year when we get to the draft deadline, y'all, because there are a handful of teams that are 3-4-ish that I'm not sure are any good. Right. So then what do you do if you're 3-4, which are, 4-3, you're somewhere in this range where you're like, hey, yeah, we're good enough that we might be able to make a playoff push, but also we're not actually good. It's just a weird year in the NFL. So it feels like it would be a tougher year than usual to trade because at 3-4, I don't know if my team's about to go on a massive losing streak and end up with 3-14, or is my team about to just pluckily get its way to 8-9, So and those things feel so drastically different. The confusing part about this year's and last weekend showed it. Bad teams played better than expected. Good teams played worse than expected. And the middle of the pack has not separated itself. So I don't even know how you figure out where your team is to figure out how to trade.
I think it matters what your roster composition is. Are you playing with a bunch of young players? I think it matters. Is your coaching staff, in particular head coach, is he fighting for a job right now? Those are questions you have to answer. Remember, Detroit was 1-6. In the deadline last year, 1-6, and how much everything changed. They trade TJ Hawkinson and everyone, oh my God, it's a teardown. They're selling Brad Holmes. Maybe Brad Holmes is in trouble. Maybe Dan Campbell's in trouble. Yeah, the owner came out and gave them the sign of approval and they're going to be okay. But who knows by the end of the season, everything turns around. I just think it's what you're playing with and whether or not you have a coaching staff that is fighting for its life. And you can't ever discount ownership, by the way. There is an element of ownership people do not. I think they don't consider this enough, particularly with a prime player. So with Carolina, Brian Burns. David Tepper absolutely is the one deciding whether or not Brian Burns is going to get traded from the Carolina Panthers. If he doesn't want that to happen, it's not going to happen. You're not going to have a fire sale unless the owner gives you the green light.
I'm just laughing at Jori laughing at that because all I can think about is you've lived that experience at the highest possible level with the Cowboys. There ain't anything happening here. You go in and you're like, excuse me, Jerry, we were thinking about trading. It's such a real thing here that, owners write these massive checks. They have a prominent voice in this process, and they should.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. And it's actually funny that you say Jerry, because I actually wasn't thinking of him. I was thinking more of when we look at some of what's going on in Cleveland right now and Deshaun and how you handle that asset, that I think that ownership is a voice that's going to be giving their opinion and making sure it's heard, or whether that's in Indianapolis. I think that as much as Jerry talks a lot, I think most of the time, he's not really in conflict with the building. But
Trey Lance. Trey Lance.
That's why I said most of the time. That was, I think Trey Lance is the exception. But other than
That's
Trey
a hell of an
Lance,
exception. That's a hell of an exception.
okay. But other than Trey Lance in the last 10 years, when do you feel like Jori and the rest of the building were really in conflict?
But he's still capable though. He's still capable.
If your like worst thing that your owner or general manager does in conflict in 10 years is trade for a backup quarterback.
True.
For a fourth round pick. I think you're I mean, that's very different than giving a fully guaranteed 5-year contract to a guy with on and off the field questions. So
I have made this point several times on different shows in my career. The perception of how the Cowboys are run is far different than the actual evidence of how the Cowboys are run when it comes to patience, when it comes to contracts, when it comes to loyalty, when it comes to coaches. Like, there's a perception that the Cowboys are still living the way they were in the 90s. Now, one ownership group that is obviously going to be a big part of any conversation would be the Commanders. And I think this is an important point as we go into it, because you realistically look at Washington, everything's up in the air. Their coaching staff, their roster, all of it's up in the air. So there are, some conversations because they haven't had contract talks yet with Chase Young or Montez Sweat. They could be open to trading them. C-Rob, like, what is the overall, I guess, plan right now when you've got new ownership trying to figure out what to do with star players and also how they're going to build for the future?
Well, there's two difficulties right now. And I actually had a chance to talk to somebody in Washington. I had a chance to talk to an external team that is looking for a pass rusher and has been eyeing those two guys, Montez Sweat and Chase Young. And so internally, the difficulty for Washington right now is that they really don't have any traction extension-wise with either Sweat or Chase Young. You have agents for these players that are sitting there going, one of these guys is getting to free agency no matter what. You're not going to use, if you decide you're going to tag one of them, one of these guys is going to make it out there. So when you're sitting there and you're looking at two players and you don't have contract traction with either of them, you're kind of making a choice here. Like it's like, if either we're going to trade one and tag the other, but if we're going to do that, we want to get appropriate assets. And so you create an environment where outside teams are sitting there going, well, you don't have a lot of leverage because you're going to lose one of these guys. Make a decision here, and all you're going to get for the guy who leaves is a 3rd-round compensatory pick, maybe, depending on how everything adds and subtracts in free agency. So that is the difficulty from Washington internally, is you have to make a decision which one of these guys can we actually get a long-term deal done with, and if we can't, we feel best about tagging that player. Externally, Chase Young is problematic for teams that are staring at them. Like, again, this team that I talked to, the GM I talked to, loves Chase Young a lot. Loved him in the draft, had a huge grade on him coming in the draft, thought he should have been the 1st overall pick. Like, that's how good he thought Chase Young was in that draft. And yet he stares at the on-field availability and says, that is absolutely real. You do not want to go out and get a guy like this, knowing you're going to extend him, and then have something come up where you have multiple years again where he's not on the field. So the medical red flags with Chase Young are not going away, even though he's been a spectacular player this year. You just do not have teams that are sitting there ready to pony up the draft compensation. And if you're going to do that, knowing you're going to sign him to an extension, and if you're not going to have the extension in place, you don't want to give up a ton of compensation. So it's more complicated for Washington than it really looks, but I think it's realistic that neither player gets moved for Washington and they just get stuck in a situation where it's an either or with the tag, and they have to try to figure that out, or hoping we'll tag one guy and maybe sign the other. That doesn't feel realistic with the assets they already have tied up in that front end of that defense.
Yeah, I feel like when you say that, I think of like, okay, if you want one of those guys and you want them for the deal that you want, then why are you trading something to a team when you can get them in the offseason potentially? And if you are doing something like that, like if you're trying to trade for them now, it's because you feel like you're in this window now. And if you're in the window now, does that mean that you want to pay them long-term? When how long is your window? And so I feel like some of these things are a little bit in conflict when you think about whether a team would be best positioned to trade for them now rather than to just try and pursue them in free agency.
I think the best, you want both, and so I'll give you an example. That the team that I talked to is a playoff contending team. I wouldn't say they're a Super Bowl level team yet, but they feel like they might get there if they're able to add a dominant edge rusher to the fold. That takes them a big step forward. But I can tell you, they're also sitting there going, if we're giving up draft assets, we're not just playing for the now right now. We want that long-term contract. We want both. And if we feel like we're not going to commit a long-term contract or can't get that done, we don't want to give up the draft assets. We want to buy a little bit cheaper, knowing, okay, we might lose them at the end of the season.
I think patience is a virtue too for Washington as an organization through this process, because when you are dealing with what comes with new ownership, there are so many things to evaluate in this process. And, when you're talking about Chase Young or Montez Sweat, what you don't want to do is let a star go. And both have the potential to be a star. Both have questions, but you don't want to let a star walk out the building. And I will never forget, I was standing on the sideline for Ohio State, Nebraska, covering the game at the time when, Chase Young walked out on the field to play. And I was standing, I'm 5'9". What do I know about anything? But I got a bunch of guys with me that played in the NFL and played high-level college football. And Chase Young walked by, and the number of guys that said, "Oh my God, he's effing huge," over and over and over. Like, you just looked at the specimen and it was like, yeah, there's no way this guy can miss. He's too big. He's too strong. He's too powerful. He's too fast. He's too athletic. He's too everything. Those traits are still there. Whatever the health issues have been, those traits are still there. So if I own the Washington Commanders, it'd be particularly hard for me to let those traits walk out the door until I'd done every ounce of research I could. As he goes somewhere else and wrecks the next 5 years, I would not. I would feel terrible about that process and the decision making. That's at least my 2 cents on it. Not the only team trying to make a tough decision, though, because another player that's shown good is Hunter Renfrow. And I feel like, as a Raiders fan, I hear this every week. It used to be Derek Carr. Now every week I get Hunter Renfrow's getting traded. See, Rob, is Hunter Renfrow getting traded?
I think he's getting traded or released. I really do. I think if they don't get a deal done for him, and he's a usable player, I really do think he's going to get traded. There's too many teams right now that would like to pick up a wide receiver, and not necessarily like a dominant one. They're not all out there going, "Oh, it's got to be Devontae Adams," who, by the way, is not getting traded anyway. We talked about that before. They knew if they got off to a competitive start, Devontae Adams was not going to be a piece that they wanted to move, unless Devontae Adams just decided, I'm going scorched earth. I'm going to burn my way out of here. But Adams has not done that. Instead, he's been saying, throw me the ball more. I want to be part of the turnaround. Let me be, the statistical guy who helps get us where we need to go ultimately, and helping the quarterback. Renfrow, on the other hand, has been written out of the offense. Like, he's just not, they're staring more at young players in terms of targets. They want to get Trey Tucker up and running. Like, that's a guy that they have a lot of faith and belief in, who can really emerge as a quality second option in that offense, or third if Michael Mayer is a guy that they feel he gets where he wants to be. So they just have other players that they're really starting to structure the scheme in the offense around. Again, I think Renfrow will ultimately get traded only because the need is out there. You're not going to get really anything in return for him. And I think if he doesn't get traded, I do think there's a realistic possibility that he gets cut on the other side of the trade deadline.
It's so funny to hear Hunter Renfrow and young guys not being the same category, because I remember Hunter Renfrow at the Senior Bowl, and I don't think of myself as being in this league very long. But I do think it's interesting just when you have a guy who's no longer going to have that ability. And what you were saying about what he could do for another team, it's not that he has to be the star, but if you just have someone else to stretch the defense, like a little bit more insurance in the postseason, these teams that are going to be able to contend, they don't just want to be relying on one or two guys. They need to have a few options.
So I'm going to ask a philosophical question to both of you. But all I keep thinking about is I'll put my fan hat on here. If you're Mark Davis and you're the owner of the Raiders today, right now in this moment, I'm not sure if you've got your coach. So if this is all about a fractured relationship between a player and a coach, and you're looking around and you're saying, well, the player was worth a bunch of money 18 months ago, and I'm not sure the coach is worth a damn, is there some level of this where you step back and you're like, I need to be patient here, because if I don't know my coach is going to be here next year, I don't want to let a talented player walk out there. Does that factor in?
Well, and I should have been clear, too, in terms of the cutting of him. They're not cutting him to save money. They would cut him to basically get part company. Okay. I know, because some people are going to hear, well, why would they cut him after the trade deadline when you're already on the hook for the money anyway? That's crazy, unless someone obviously picks him up on the waiver wire and they decide, which could happen, by the way. He could get released and someone puts in a claim on him and they end up paying the rest of that salary. I'm saying that the cutting would happen because you're just trying to you're moving on with who you plan to build around, and you're not necessarily going to pay just to have somebody in the building who clearly is, I don't want to say at odds with Josh McDaniel, but would like to be a bigger part of ultimately what they're doing. I don't think Hunter Renfrow, though, is going to weigh on whether or not Josh McDaniels is going to be the coach there. I think the ultimate final record is, and feeling how they feel about where they're at the quarterback spot and all these different things. I think if Josh McDaniels is close to 500 by the end of the season, I think Mark Davis will sit there and go, okay, we knew we didn't want to use the R word, the rebuild word, but look where we ended up. We have some young players. It was a good draft. It looks like it's a pretty good draft. If we can add another good draft on top of that, it feels like we're ultimately moving in the right direction. He's not going to sit there and go, well, geez, that Hunter Renfrow thing didn't work out. We got to get rid of Josh. It's like we can have that happen.
Look, I just like the fact that you said we could be mediocre. Go ahead, Jori. Like I'm all like I'm in my feels in all the good ways. My day got better.
When we look at the Raiders' decision to deal Darren Waller to the Giants, and also the way that they kind of took on some of that salary with the signing bonus, is there anything that Darren Waller's trade could tell us about what the Raiders would do with Hunter Renfrow and what some of the options are for teams that want him but maybe have questions about the salary?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, you could deal him and eat some of the salary. I don't think there's, but it's what asset are you getting in return? Like if someone's like, hey, we'll give you a 7th. And you got to eat some of the salary. You're like, why are we going to eat salary just to get a 7th round pick? Like that's not really.
But they did it for a 3rd on Darren Waller, so 4th or 5th.
If it's a middle round pick, which is definitely more than I think Renfrow really is could draw at this point, then I think you're talking about but I do think it would, like if it's a 4th, I could see them eating some of the salary, because a 4th, I think they feel good enough about how the last draft went and their evaluation, and also their commitment to building the team by stacking draft classes, that maybe a 4th would put them in a position where they feel
I'm cheap as hell. Like I'm the first to admit I'm cheap as hell. I don't like spending money twice on it. Like I have very set rules when it comes to finances for me. Like if you tell me something's going to cost this much, I will pay it. I will pay good money for something. I don't want to have to spend money twice, and I want my expectations to be met. I cannot imagine being an NFL owner and they're like, hey, so I know you put like $32 million into this, so we're going to let him go. You're going to have to pay a little of that to let him go. Like, oh man, I would be mother effing somebody the whole way out there. I don't care how rich you are. C-Rob's out here just throw it like, like you're out there letting full candy bars be taken off your porch. I'd be out there like I'm dictating. You get one, and I don't like your costume, so you get the generic full candy bar. You get the like. We're just different there.
Mark Davis got to move from Oakland to Las Vegas by himself. He didn't have to share with the Chargers. How much more is that franchise worth? I don't care how much debt Mark Davis is carrying, which is considerable, but that franchise is worth so much more than it was before the NFL. He shouldn't complain about any decision after even the Gruden meltdown and that whole deal. He should not complain about anything for the end of time. And if he does, Stan Kroenke's going to be like, I got a team that I got to share my $7 billion stadium with, and they only got to pay $1 a year just to be here. Like, what bullshit is this? There's no person more pissed off at Mark Davis than Stan Kroenke.
C-Rob just suggested the newest Succession. We'll do a whole show about, a football team that's got a beautiful stadium and also mired in debt nobody wants to talk about. Let's get into a couple other candidates out here. Brian Burns, I know we talk about him every week. I feel like anything, C-Rob, anything new on where Brian Burns could end up?
I mean, there's definitely interest. And I tend to think if we're sitting there going, well, who's definitely going to get traded? I think Renfrow's availability, interestingly, might muddle the Denver situation a little bit. They're not the same level of receiver. And I still think I would put it above 50% that I still think one of those guys, either Sutton or Judy, gets dealt from the Denver Broncos, because I do think both have some value right now and could get a solid draft asset in return. And then there's teams out there that have enough of a need that they want a receiver they think is a cut above of like a Renfrow or can play outside. I still look at Carolina, though. If I'm like, where do we really realistically expect a deal to go down? I still think Carolina and Burns, it's tough because, again, it's a Tepper decision. It really is. And I can't read that guy's mind, but they want draft assets, and the clearest path to getting back some draft assets to build around Bryce Young. And that's what I was told, is that Tepper really wants the focus to be about adding pieces around Young, doing everything they can to insulate this guy, particularly considering you're going into a week where you're playing Houston and the guy you passed on to take Bryce Young could
new
be
offensive coordinator.
Yeah, new offensive coordinator.
And new play caller.
And you're going into a week where the other guy's probably going to beat you this week, which isn't going to feel good. Everyone's going to talk about, or having passed on CJ Stroud, excuse me. Tepper wants the draft assets there to build around Bryce Young moving forward, and he wants to make that right. I think in his mind, it can't be another situation where they were wrong on quarterback. They have to make it right. The only way, realistically, you could do that is to move Burns at this point and get some draft capital for him. And I'm telling you, externally, there's definitely interest, but I don't know that teams want to give up like this idea that Brian Burns is a 2 first-round pick guy. I don't think teams out there are going, we're going to give up 2 first-round picks when there's such little control in terms of the rest of Brian Burns' career.
Jori, anybody else out there that you're thinking about could get moved through all of this?
To me, I'm almost more like, who's going to be buying than who are they going to be buying in a degree. Like, okay, when you see what the Lions did this past week, like they should probably do something particular, maybe on that defensive side. I think it's funny when you hear Jerry Jones talk about how on one hand, he would extend to make the Cowboys better, but on the other hand, he's not going looking for something because that doesn't give you the price you want. He said, like, we're kind of in like lay and wait mode and see who's calling us, which is just such a contrast to what you're seeing across the division in the NFC East with what Howie Roseman just did. So I think it'll be interesting to see like which teams actually believe that it is worth making a move as much as it is who they're making the move for.
Yeah, that Lions loss is going to sting, but I have a sneaking suspicion on Monday night they'll get right quick. Not everybody's getting right quick. We were just going to move right
on that Lions note, I was looking up the rest of their schedule for my article this past week, and I think of their next 10 games left, 9 of them are against teams with losing records right now.
I said this last week on one of the shows. I genuinely believe the Lions have a very clear path to being the number 1 seed in the NFC. It doesn't mean that they will be the best team in the NFC. It just means that they have a very clear path to a first round bye and a home field game for their first playoff game. Like it's all right. C-Rob, don't take this away from America. America wants this.
What does our Michigan native want to say about the PTSD he has from growing up near the Lions? Go ahead.
I can tell you this. When they were getting their ass whooped against Baltimore, my phone was exploding with everybody who I grew up with going, it's still the same team. I'm like, God, can you guys just calm down? Like, you know what? It's a reality check. Sometimes it's a good thing to get absolutely punched in the face so you realize you're not there yet. You still, you're still building, you're still rounding in form, you're still learning how to win games like this. You got to explain that to people. And by the way, Baltimore not bereft of talent. And
yeah, they're very good.
They've been playing pretty good of late. You know, the offense is starting to look like how they've wanted it to look. Yeah, I will say this to the Lions. If you're going to make a trade deadline move, you better know we're getting David Montgomery back, okay? And we're going to have him. We're going to wait until he's close to 100%. Get the banger back that we need. And I'm sorry, you got to look at Jameson Williams and be like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, I know he's going to get some more snaps. Marvin Jones has stepped away from football. He's going to get more percentage opportunities. But again, he's still dropping passes. We can't do this feast and famine, 3 games of nothing, a touchdown. Oh, they have to know whether or not they're getting something out of Jameson Williams realistically down the stretch. And if they're not, that's one of those teams that I still think could be in play for a wide receiver and just go, hey, we still believe in Jameson. We'll elongate his timeline a little bit. Let's go get a veteran for the rest of the season to stretch run. Our Emmanuel Sanders pickup a la the 49ers in 2019. Take a little bit of stress off of Jameson Williams and see if maybe we can operate functionally with a veteran.
Sierra, I'm glad you brought all that up because when I was watching last week's game and coming out, I was just wondering, okay, we keep hearing Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, head coaching candidate. I guess going into this season is point A, point B going into last week, and point C now. How would you chart that line of what the interest looks like in him? Like, how much does it matter that in one of these bigger games, his team just could not do anything?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. Again, I think it's, there's still plenty of time to measure him. And if I would say that if this happens a few more times over the course of the season, and let's say they get into the playoffs, and again, they get thumped, that's going to be problematic. But I don't think the capital he's building has really been a 2-year process. And again, working with Jared Goff, I think Jared's fine. I think he's, potentially a top half of the league quarterback, which functionally I think they can win with. But I still think people out there go, hey, it's really impressive with, what he's doing with Jared Goff, because no one thinks it's Dan Campbell, who's helped to turn this guy around. They all think that it's the OC. So Trez and I used to talk about this all the time. Teams that round themselves into contenders, first you have to learn how to beat teams. Once you figure that out, then you beat teams that have comparable talent to you, and then you have to beat teams that might not only have better talent than you, but better experience. It's all a process. I think the Lions have figured out how to beat bad teams. I think they've figured out how to beat teams with comparable talent, but what they have is problems with teams that either have comparable talent or better talent, and then actual experience, not only on the coaching staff, but then with multiple veteran players. So,
which is also why that week 1 win against the Chiefs was important.
It was a fair point.
It was important, but people are going to look at Kelsey in that game, and they're going to go,
but Kelsey and Chris Jones.
You still got the win. You still got the look. I'll give you a
listen to what Jori just said. Kelsey and Chris Jones, like.
But anytime Mahomes is on there, haven't the Kansas City Chiefs actively been taking all talent away from Patrick Mahomes for a lot of years to just see what he can do? And if you can beat Patrick Mahomes, it matters.
They added Mecole Hardman, and they look, Chris Jones.
That is very compelling.
Chris Jones got done, right? So that got done, and I don't think there's any question that it made a difference for the Chiefs since that has happened.
Don't tell that to Lions fans. That's not very nice.
Mecole Hardman, they go and get Mecole Hardman for him. So I go back to that win over the Chiefs, and it was at Arrowhead. It's still impressive. It really is. And it was such a mental game for the Lions, such a big deal. But come on, let's call it what it is. There were 2 superstars who were not on the field at that time. I would not want to go up against the Chiefs again now if I was the Lions, especially if the T person is in the audience, where I saw the breakdown of when the TS, the name I'm not going to say because I don't want to tank the podcast, but when the TS is in attendance, here's what Travis Kelce's receiving numbers are versus when the TS is not in attendance.
TS, not TS.
The TS.
ET, phone home.
Haters gonna hate. I'll give you an a not so hard prediction into a bold prediction. Everybody will be fine with the Lions on Monday night when they win by, I think, more than 40 points. The bold prediction out of that is Josh McDaniels doesn't get off the flight, and he's the first coach canned after that thing goes to absolute hell.
Are you hearing something? I mean, I know people inside the org, so I gotta ask.
No, I will say this:
he's hoping, not hearing.
No.
Okay.
This is the only weird thing to me is usually I hear you've lost your mind. Now I'm just not hearing anything, right? So I'm getting ghosted now. I'm getting ghosted. You know what? I'm getting ghosted. Maybe it means something. I don't know. Maybe I'm just hoping.
Maybe you didn't give them enough full candy bars.
Well, there's always more look, if candy bars get me information or more swag, I'll do that. All right. So obviously Browns fans are hoping that they can figure out what the hell's going on with their quarterback position. We should touch on this as we go through everything. Call it what you want. To me, y'all tell me what you think. It looked like Deshaun Watson got benched. I mean, he takes a bad hit. He clears concussion protocol. That's a very important part of this. He cleared protocol, but then, for his safety, they kept him out of the game, a game where, you would think that your $240 million guaranteed contract quarterback would need to be in there on a 1-point game all the way down to the end. I have a hard time seeing this, C-Rob, as anything other than a benching of a quarterback.
This is a tough situation. It's tough what's going on right now in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson, because I think you have an aspect where a team is looking at him medically and they feel like this is a guy that can go out there and play medically. Is there a pain threshold element? No doubt in my mind that there's a pain threshold element and that there might be a mental element tied to the pain threshold element. If Deshaun is getting out there and feeling like there's a pain threshold that is keeping him from throwing at 100%. If he can't get all the velocity he wants on the ball, you have a guy who then starts to change his game based on how he feels he's throwing the football and then the pain that he's enduring during that process. The reason why this is scary for the Browns. They just had a quarterback in Baker Mayfield who went through this in the organization, and they saw how that ultimately unfolded with him when they felt like, hey, medically you're cleared. You can be out there throwing. It might not feel great, but you got to grit your teeth through it. And we need you. And then it all fell apart. It went horribly wrong. And you don't want that to happen ultimately with Deshaun Watson. What I think happened in that game was go back to like the Titans game, right? Like they felt like, all right, we've cleared a threshold with him. We've cleared a hurdle. And then they saw regression. And I don't think they think, hey, that's a mental thing in terms of what he's seeing out there or not being prepared or whatever. I think they feel like he thinks his shoulder's not right. It doesn't feel right when he's throwing the football. And so he's compensating in ways that are creating turnovers or making decisions. So when he comes off the field, you can call it a bench, you can call it whatever you want, but they're like, look, he's not right now. So we're going to go ahead and finish out the game with PJ, and we'll hit the reset button and expect that he'll be our starter next week, as long as nothing medically has changed. It's just a jacked up. Like if you had asked me, give me the worst case scenario for Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, I would have said, comes in, doesn't live up to the $230 million guaranteed contract, which is going to be hard, even if he plays really well. Has a great defense, but appears to be the offense is holding that defense back. And then on top of it, there's some kind of injury issue that muddles the whole thing. We're there. Like, it's like all these things are happening right now. And the only way you get out of it is he feels 100%, goes out and puts together a string of really good games, and you get it turned in the right direction. But it's a tough spot because that defense is, if they were playing complementary football and had an offense that could be there for them consistently with a Deshaun Watson, great team. They did score. I will say this though, like, it's not like they didn't score in the last game. Like we know it was the defense. Like we know how much the defense is kicking in right now. I think
they think Myles Garrett had like 17 of those points, and you factor in the swing and points for the blocked field goal and the defensive and the safety. Yeah, there's a lot going on. But no, I think Sierra makes a lot of really good points. And I was talking to someone with the organization and just being like, look, Jim Irsay last week is saying Andrew Luck history is factoring into how we're handling Anthony Richardson. Do you think it's fair that Baker Mayfield is factoring into what you're doing with Deshaun Watson? They're like, yeah, we should have protected Baker in a couple games more than we did. And we learned from that. And so you also have a different level of investment in Deshaun financially and from a public perception standpoint than you did in Baker at that time. And I think you say like, okay, the coach's job, one of the many jobs that a coach has, is to protect a player from himself. And so when you ask the question, did Deshaun get benched? To me, are you saying did he get benched as in they no longer thought he was the best player and so he's not playing anymore? Or did a coach decide that it is in my hands and not in the player's hands whether he's playing? Because even if he doesn't have a concussion or something else, he is no longer physically capable of doing what we need him to do to play at a high level. And if he is not going to be able to physically play above the threshold where he's significantly better than PJ Walker, if the defense can close out the game, then why are you not letting that heal up for a couple more games? And I don't know exactly when he'll come back, but I'll say they're playing Seattle this week. Then they've got the Cardinals next week. And then you go back to Ravens and Steelers. To me, if I'm looking at this and I'm trying to say like this is clearly impacting him physically, probably mentally as well, or it is impacting him, it's just a matter of how that mental impact is sort of manifesting on the field, I'm not bringing him back before the division games because I think that's when you really need him and you have the defense where you can win a few of these games and you have other guys who are stepping up. And I think that also there's this mental element of among the things that made Deshaun so successful on the field in Houston when he was playing at his peak before so many things went wrong was his ability to play free, to improvise, and to just kind of like go off script and off schedule. And that requires a certain level of athleticism. And as C-Rob was saying, that requires a certain level of comfort with what you are physically able to do and thus mentally going to be thinking about doing.
And Jori hits on the point that's really important here is that it is in the hands of the coaching staff to look at the player and go, something's not right here. Something's not working. We haven't lost confidence in you, but I'm not going to put you out there again for more futility or more problems or potentially to hurt yourself if it's not going right now. I got to make the call to protect you. It does, and that's in a coach's hands. A coach should make ultimately that decision.
But let me see, Rob, though. Let me push back on that, though, because the only thing I would say is Stefanski, if it's in Stefanski's hands, shouldn't he have handled it better?
That's the key point is that I think that if that is where this is, and I think Jori is 100% correct, that is where this is organizationally in terms of the front office and the coaching staff. I do think at some point you have to send the message externally, like, hey, look, we're working through this right now, okay? And it's not a confidence issue. We have institutional memory of going through this with a quarterback and feeling like we learned lessons. We're implementing those lessons now to try and get him ultimately where he needs to be, because we still know this is our guy moving forward. You have to send an external message that I think is what is maybe lacking here a little bit. You have the media there, you have, people like us. There's a lot of people on the outside going, hey, what is the problem here? And they want to know. I think most people want to hear them say, he's cleared medically. He is not there from a mental standpoint in terms of how he is functioning mechanically in his mind in relation to the pain and the injury.
So, and that's where I found the quote from earlier in October when he didn't play. And Stefanski said he was medically cleared. But this is a quote, and I think this is why it bothers so many people. The quote from Stefanski was, he knows his body. He's played through serious pain before, very, very serious pain. It wasn't a matter of pain tolerance or anything. He just did not feel like he had his full faculties. Where is the organization then saying, like, we did not feel like, when he says, when the coach comes out and says he does not feel, that leads me to, like, as someone sitting here watching and say, man, either y'all didn't communicate very well or you're not on the same page to where he is.
Yeah, they didn't communicate very well. And I think that that's sort of like where a lot of this started, is if you're saying, well, he's cleared. Well, what does it mean to be cleared? And what does it mean to be injured versus hurt? And how does this all really manifest itself? And if a guy is cleared in the sense that he is not going to create more long-term damage because he can play, but that doesn't mean he's actually physically capable of playing at 70, 80%. Obviously, no one's really 100% at this time of the season. And then I think the other thing that complicated things even more is when Deshaun went into the tent for a concussion check the other day. And he actually said after the game, Deshaun did, that he was confused about that because he's like, I didn't even realize that, but someone on the Sky Judge said my head hit the ground. And so they called me in. And so then it's like, oh, well, if he doesn't have a concussion, he can play. But that doesn't mean that his shoulder is still not hurt. And also that you let the guy go try and prove it and it didn't work out. And so now you have to say, like, this was a bad idea and I'm going to stop it before it gets even worse. And I think if anything, like I was really interested in this question of, if you have a long-term investment in a guy, does that make you want to protect him more to protect your investment over the next several years? Or does it make you want to get what your ROI for your investment now? But I think on the flip side of that is that if you're Deshaun, you probably feel this pressure to play through it and be like, I want to make sure that, like, my teammates think I'm doing something for all this money I'm getting paid. And I think maybe even you take that to a fault by trying to play when you're not really at an ability to play.
It all makes sense. It's a complicated issue.
No. C-Rob smirking. What doesn't make sense?
I just think they're splitting hairs. They don't want to go out there and say the guy feels, you don't want to put it on your quarterback that he hurts. Like, oh, he's hurting. Like he's not
because pain is weakness in the NFL.
100%. And you don't want to put it out there that our quarterback, he hurts and he feels pain and he's not playing well through the pain. Like, he's having an issue playing well through pain, and it's altering the way that he plays the game or how he makes decisions. Like, physiologically, and I think this has sort of been hinted at in everything, the coverage that we've seen come out about this, is that it's like, well, maybe it's not a pain thing, but physiologically there's something going on with an underlying muscle that's not allowing him to function mechanically the way that he should. But that doesn't mean that medically he has failed. It just means that right now, physiologically, there's a muscle in there that is interrupting his ability to play at 100%. If that is what it is, come out and explain that to people in words that they can understand, because otherwise it gets interpreted through, if he's not playing, is it mental? Like, has Deshaun Watson lost confidence? Is this a mental thing? Or is it a mental thing in relation to, my body is not responding the way that I want to? And that is creating a lot of issues. Bottom line, this sucks for that franchise right now to be going through this. And it's probably not lost on people in Houston, where I live, where they're like, he took a lot of punishment here, some of which was incurred at his own hands by holding onto the football and making plays. And it was something that they often would try to work with Deshaun on, which was, there are times you got to get rid of the ball. There are times where, like, you can't hold on to it forever to make big plays. We understand that. And we like that about you some of the time, but you do have to protect yourself. Your body is taking a beating here. I don't think that's I feel like we're still seeing that, in Cleveland.
Right. This is a guy who in his career has taken, 206 sacks, and he took 62 in 2018 alone. That was the most in the league, 384 yards of velocity, and 44, 49 the next couple of years. That's a lot of wear and tear on the body. And oh, by the way, all that wear and tear stays while some of the ability to keep your body fresh and in the football momentum doesn't stay in the 2 years that you're not playing.
And that's just sacks. If you go back and watch the way he played.
Right, that's not hits, yeah.
Yeah, he would take a lot of hits, not just sacks.
Yeah.
So.
All right, before we get out of here real quick, C-Rob, I know you've got an article out there right now on Jordan Love. It's not the Jordan Love experiment. I know we're up against it, but I just got to ask for everybody that's looking at this, what's the level of panic in Green Bay?
I don't think it's panic, but I think they know. I think they're probably happy right now that they structured next year's deal to have $5.5 million base salary, because that's a backup quarterback salary. And I think they know we're going to have an 11-game measurement here of what Jordan Love is. And if this all falls apart, again, they just lost to Denver. It's a possibility this is another Drake May team, right? Maybe another Caleb team. He's on the clock here for the next 11 games. I think, to me, when you watch the Denver game, the most problematic part of it was, and I know it was 3rd and 20 on the drive where he has an opportunity to take them down the field and potentially win the game. The play in which he throws an interception, it's a clean pocket. It's 3rd and 20. He's trying to make a big play, but there was a running back in the flat to his left who probably could have caught and run with the ball, maybe to 20 yards, but at least 10, somewhere in the 10 to 20 range, right? And then you have the 4th down to try and convert. He had Jalen Reed, the rookie, had just cleared the safety and was running open. And instead, he's like, hey, here's a town hall meeting. Let me throw it in the middle of the town hall meeting. When I have a clean pocket and I still have a moment to make a decision here, he takes the play that is by far the wrong play, the one that was going to have the lowest percentage. And it was also in a game where one of his touchdown pass in the end zone, we all saw it was miraculous, skips off one player's hands, lands in Jalen Reed's hands behind him in the end zone. It was just one of those games where you're like, these decisions are the troubling ones. They're the ones that he has to work out of his game. And he's not a rookie. This is, we've had this guy for years sitting on the bench. This is year 4. Got to not be this guy right now. And you have to show us consistently that you're going to be able to clean up that mistake. Now, that's one he'll see on film, and they'll go, in this scenario, you have to clean up this mistake. You can't make this mistake again and just try to take it all at once on a low percentage play down the field. So I would say there's enough consternation to know that this is a measurement for him right now. And realistically, that's a potentially pretty nice place for a quarterback next offseason, because the defense does have talent. These young players are all going to have an additional year on them of experience. You could get a rookie quarterback and it be a better starting point for that player next year. Bakhtiari supposedly is going to be back next year. We'll see. Not great for the Packers right now, but that's... I
patently will not allow it, C-Rob. I will not allow the Packers to get Caleb Williams or Drake May. It is unfair. There has to be a limit. You've had enough franchise quarterbacks in a row. You don't get another one. The Patriots and the Packers should not be allowed to draft him.
But he breaks the chain, right? I mean, technically, doesn't Jordan Love break the chain?
So, C-Rob, I know you wrote in your piece this week this idea of you wrote about Jordan Love at the beginning of the year, how he started out strong. He didn't have the talent around him. Now it's more like, does he have what he needs? Does he personally have what he needs to be the guy for the team? I guess what I'm curious is, do we think that Jordan Love's relatively strong start to the season, I think he exceeded expectations in the first few weeks of the season, does that make it more difficult for him to win fans over right now, or less difficult? Had he had some tougher games at the beginning where they're like, we don't have Rodgers, and then improved, then it's okay, well, maybe it just took him some time, versus if he showed he did it and he couldn't maintain it, then we can't trust him.
Fans are fickle. I mean, he puts together 2 good games and everybody's fine.
He'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, you know how it is. It doesn't take much for people to feel good again. I think for me, when I wrote that piece early in the season, I was like, let's look at his surrounding pieces relative to what Rodgers were in terms of the experience. It's not the same. And so you have to be patient with this guy and go through the thumps. Well, Denver was a thump because he sidearms a ball into the end zone with way too much velocity and is behind Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs wasn't going to catch that pass, and he just gets lucky that it skips off Doubs' hands and lands in Jalen Reed's hands. And then again, that last play was not about young players. That last play was about Jordan Love. One of the young players was open. The running back was open. He chose the guy who wasn't open and said, let me jack it from a clean pocket. That's a Jordan Love problem. That's not a surrounding talent problem. And to me, that's part of this. Okay, let's be patient here. I still think it's worth the patience. There's plenty of time left for this to get itself where it ultimately needs to be. But it's concerning enough coming out of Denver that you're like, if we can't beat Denver, and it's because of decisions that are getting made, how good is this team really realistically in the long term? And where does that put us relative to, is there another quarterback out there who is actually the resolution and it's not Jordan?
Well, nobody has to be patient to keep hanging out with us. We're back tomorrow with Zero Blitz. You can check that out. Of course, follow us all on social media, all of our names respectively. Stone, the producer extraordinaire, S.J. Rochelle. That's how you get to Stone. C-Rob, tell everybody how they can support Therese Paylor's legacy.
As always, we ask you to go check out breakingt.com/Therese. That's capital T and Breaking T. The All Juice tees and hoodies are there for your purchase. And remember, proceeds from those purchases go to support the Therese Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can contribute to that scholarship directly, as well as the one in his name at Mizzou, if you check out our podcast description. So thank you.
And be sure, while you're checking out the podcast description, I'm going to learn to talk, to give us a 5-star review, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, enemies, tell everybody just to hang out with us every single week. We will be back next Wednesday with more inside coverage. Have a great week. Thanks for hanging out with us, y'all.